views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Coming up on this edition of Perspectives, the January 6th committee announces it will make the case that former President Trump was directly responsible for the Capitol attack. But with all that Americans are facing today, is their case falling on deaf ears? Plus, our New York State governor's race is building. Our guest weighs in on his thoughts about the candidates and the key issues of the race. Stay tuned. All this and much more headed your way. You're watching Perspectives with Daren Jaime.
What's on your mind?
Let 'em know.
Express what's on your mind. What's on your mind?
Let 'em know. Anything relevant to life, you bring it to the table. Whether you make a move solo or a movement with a stable. No fables, you speak on your decisions. Cause in the long run, it's your voice, your views, your vision. Keeping it real with many messages for you to know. This ain't radio, but DJ runs the show. Entertainment, he rocks it. Politics, he locks it. The host with the most would handle any topic. Don't forget to share your perspective with shines of light. Cause it might make a difference in someone else's life.
And hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Perspectives. I am Daren Jaime, and of course, we thank you for watching. As always, you can watch Perspectives every week here on BronxNet's Channel 67. We also invite you to stay connected to us on our social media platforms at BronxNet TV. If you're looking to reach me personally, my Facebook page is Daren C. Jaime. That's our professional page on Facebook. And then also on Instagram and Twitter at DCJaime23. There you can get some information as well as some inspiration as well. Well, coming up on today's show, our guest today, a longtime friend of Perspectives. He's a retired New York State Assemblyman who represented District 79 from 2003 to 2010. He is currently a columnist and also associate editorial page editor at the New York Post. We're pleased to have you joining us now and sharing with us his perspectives on Perspectives. None other than Michael Benjamin. And Mike, good to have you back on the show.
Thank you. Glad to be on again. Happy Father's Day and a happy Juneteenth.
Yeah, happy Father's Day, happy Juneteenth, and listen, a whole lot to talk about during this time. June is a busy month. Let's get right at it. Here in New York State, we are preparing for the primaries. New York State Governor Kathy Hochul, the incumbent, and looking to see if she can get into the seat on her own after replacing former Governor Andrew Cuomo, who was resigning from office due to personal accountability issues. Let's talk about Governor Hochul for a minute because you've got Tom Suozzi, you've got Jumaane Williams. They're get to set to debate, but yet and still, many people still think that even though Lieutenant Governor Hochul Governor Hochul is the incumbent, she still has somewhat of an uphill battle.
Yeah, I guess it depends on who you speak to because all the polls show her with a healthy lead over Tom Suozzi, the congressman from Long Island, Nassau and Queens, I believe, and Jumaane Williams, the New York City public advocate. She leads most polls, seems comfortable. Jumaane Williams, is a progressive, so he's coming at her from her left flank. And then you have Tom Suozzi, the congressman, who's running as a centrist, who's more moderate, who's focusing on crime and other issues as a way of making his place in the race. But as you know, incumbents, whether they're in office for a year or however long, they do have the advantage of the incumbency, of being ahead. And she has been in the news regularly. She's now fighting the good fight on Roe v. Wade, anticipating the Supreme Court's decision to do away with it. So she's making New York State the epicenter of women's rights when it comes to right to abortion. And recent legislation has been passed to allow women who from out of state to be able to come to New York and obtain abortions if that's their choice. It's looking at possibly codifying Roe v. Wade, codifying abortion rights in the New York State Constitution. That didn't happen this past legislative session, but she says she's pushing for it. We'll see what happens. Early voting started this past weekend here in New York State. I haven't cast my vote yet. I intend to. I like voting early. I encourage all New Yorkers in Bronxites to cast their early vote if they can. The New York Post endorsed her rival Tom Suozzi for governor, and Daily News endorsed the incumbent Governor Kathy Hochul. You also have the race for lieutenant governor. We have three people who are basically unknown. You have Congressman Antonio Delgado from Hudson Valley. He's leaving Congress to become lieutenant governor. He is lieutenant governor at present. Then you have Anna Maria Archila, who's running with Jumaane Williams. This is lieutenant governor candidate. She's an activist. I believe she would Make the Road and other kinds of activist groups in New York City. And then you have Diana Reyna, former city councilman from Brooklyn, as well as the former deputy borough president in Brooklyn. Everybody's had their debates. People have heard from them. Some of the criticism of the lieutenant governor candidates is that none of them seem prepared to become governor on day one, as Governor Hochul found out later on that she became governor after a few years with Andrew Cuomo. So that's a big concern. I think that's more of a toss-up race as to who wins that, although Delgado may have an advantage because he is currently the incumbent lieutenant governor, and he has Hochul behind him. But I think it'll be a surprise, and I think Diana Reyna will emerge as the victor on June 28th. I think for governor, Hochul does have that advantage. Swazi's hitting her hard on what he thinks is her pocket when it comes to guns. She had once touted the support of the NRA when she's a member of Congress, and he finds that hypocritical for her to talk about wanting gun safety when she's a member of Congress. She worked with the NRA in helping to expand and preserve gun rights.
Yeah. Well, one name that you didn't mention really was Jumaane Williams, and very well known in New York City. But I think the problem is when you talk about going across the state, he's having a hard time making the reach with other voters. What seems to be lacking in the Jumaane Williams campaign that is not giving him the steam that he projected?
Well, I think he was encouraged by his run for lieutenant governor a couple of years ago, where he did well. He surprised Hochul. I think people were kind of angry at Cuomo during that election, and he was the person who sort of helped to voice that anger, and he came close. I think it's his message is probably not helping him. I mean, he's seen as soft on crime. He's seen as a leftist, if not a socialist, by others in parts of upstate. I think in the areas that are college towns like Utica and other places, he may have greater support. Places where he did well for lieutenant governor, as in Buffalo and Rochester, that have large minority communities, he'll do well there. But I don't think he'll do enough in a three-person race to be able to emerge as the victor. I don't think there's anything that he's done on a policy part, because he sat before New York Post editorial board and discussed with us what his issues are. He's very strong in his issues. He believes in his issues. He's very articulate. It's just his issues right now are not the ones that New Yorkers really are comfortable with. Most polls are showing, Siena poll recently showed that New Yorkers across the state are afraid of crime and think that they may become a crime victim themselves. I mean, that's a matter of their perspective and the crime that's happening in their local community. But we know there are lots of gun crimes and shootings in New York City, in Buffalo, in Rochester, in Syracuse, and people are concerned about the rise in crime, the rise in disorder, and they're not comfortable with someone like a Jumaane Williams becoming governor and possibly, in their view, exacerbating things as they already are.
Talk to me a little bit about the rise in gun violence. Obviously, New York State Governor Kathy Hochul signing into law the ban on, or I should say, increased legislation when it comes to ghost guns. We know that that's going to be something that people will see longer jail sentences, but yet and still, you talk to a lot of insiders. People are fighting the good fight, and they're saying, "Listen, we have crime, we've got guns. These guns on the streets. It's not going to be a real deterrent." But yet and still, she feels as though definitely necessary to make a statement, particularly after the Tops massacre. How much do you feel the governor right now is getting her message across to Democrats that I'm in control, I understand the issues, and I'm going to do something about
it? I think she is. She's on the air. She's on TV. She's on radio. She's trying to get that message out. She's appearing to be, tough in the aftermath of the horrible Buffalo tragedy, the massacre. She acted with the legislature to pass new legislation to tighten the loopholes in things like the red flag law that might have allowed police to have stopped Peyton Gendron from having guns and keeping his guns and going on his killing spree. But for New Yorkers, New York City residents, people who live in minority urban communities, these changes aren't going to be helpful to us, because it's not white supremacists who are causing mayhem in our neighborhoods. It's local criminals, thugs who have guns, and those guns are all illegal. They're gotten from out of state. They are not subject to background checks when they get their illegal guns. It's usually from people who are straw buyers in Tennessee or in North Carolina, Illinois, Tennessee, those places, and bring the guns to New York. And then they're sold and they get on the street, and criminals get the guns and they start shooting. We had a tragedy here in the Bronx of the 11-year-old in the Bronx, in my old assembly district, who was shot and killed standing on a street corner, minding her own business, waiting for her family to leave a beauty salon. Two young guys, one 17-year-old, a 14-year-old, were on motorbikes, and they shot at I guess a rival gang member, and of course they missed, and the bullet goes whizzing down the block and strikes an 11-year-old, killing her, snuffing out her life. And those are the things that concern New York. We see that going on regularly. It has nothing really to do with the gun control laws. I mean, many of these guns are from out of state, and you also have the fact when legislature raised the age to prevent young people from unfairly, in their view, being incarcerated and being involved in leak with the justice system. It emboldened, adult sociopaths to begin to recruit younger gang members and then letting them do the shootings because they feel they're going to go to family court. They're not going to serve any real time. And these poor children agree, and we have these kinds of tragedies. And you wonder why New Yorkers are angry and really don't have much care or regard for kids who shoot other kids. I mean, it's disheartening. We get angry and we want something done, and we believe justice is trying those young people who shoot another person as adults and putting them away for a couple of years until they in some way become rehabilitated, get older, more mature, and realize the error of their ways, and are released and come back into regular society and hopefully hold jobs and do what's necessary. Yeah. Now, Jumaane Williams for governor has talked about more kinds of violent interrupters being out there in communities to help calm things and to show people the other way. That show kids there's another way to go. I mean, and Mayor Adams is using it as part of a multi-pronged strategy that involves law enforcement, but also you have some of the social interventions that can also be helpful occurring at the same time. I think the mayor has sort of the right strategy. Let's give that a try and see what happens. The social programming already exists. We already have free lunches in school, so kids aren't starving when they go to school. Nobody's really getting suspended in school for misbehaving, so they're not in a way being judged as terrible people. There's free education, public education. Schools need to get better. The mayor is working on it, and the governor has talked about putting more money into education. So the things that are there, and I think those who break the law ought to be punished and not to be slapped on the wrist and have sort of revolving door where they're arrested for their crime and then let out the next day or a couple of days later to be on the street and to intimidate possible witnesses.
Yeah. Does her position right now put her in a place where, let's say she wins the primary? We know that there's still the general election that has to go. When you look at New York State, the only thing that's really keeping New York State from becoming a red state is us, downstate. I mean, when you look at it, it's more than 40 counties that have that won Republican in the last presidential race. When we look at New York State, of course, we know the millions of people in the popular vote that really helped to carry Democrats across the finish line. Does she have what it takes, given the fact of what's going on right now, the climate right now, to be able to maintain that Democratic stronghold and still regain her seat in Albany?
Technically, she does. I mean, there is a huge Democratic enrollment advantage, but it comes down to her being able to motivate. If she is the Democratic nominee, her ability to motivate her base, whether it's downstate New York and the surrounding suburban counties, including Erie County and Monroe, which are heavily Democratic and are large urban centers that could help her win. Former Governor George Pataki, a Republican, the last Republican to hold office, he held office for 12 years. He says in order for a Republican candidate, and in the New York Post's mind, the Post endorsed Congressman Lee Zeldin to be the Republican nominee. Zeldin would need 1 million if he wins the primary. He needs a million Democratic votes, according to Governor Pataki, in order for him to be competitive and to win in November.
When we talk about New York, everybody talks about the tax structure and the fact that so many people are leaving New York. As a matter of fact, 32% more people left on an annual basis, 32% more this past year than any other year. And a lot of people attribute it to taxes, Michael. I mean, let's be honest. New York is a high tax state. You got everything from property tax to tobacco tax to all of these things that are really playing into the hearts and minds of people, and they're making a bolt. What's going to happen in order for things to change?
I mean, you guys spoke earlier about how things are changing in Syracuse, for instance. Manufacturing jobs over the last 30 or 40 years. It's a continuing trend all across the state. And Governor Cuomo's economic development program hasn't really done a lot to stem the loss. And the loss is also because of the pandemic. Loss of population here in New York and across the state because of pandemic restrictions, people wanting to go mask-free and to live in lower tax communities, less expensive communities. So they're moving south, moving to Florida, moving to North Carolina, moving to other states where the cost of living is a lot less. Crime is a lot less. Their money goes further, and we're seeing that loss. And I think the pandemic helped to accelerate that. And of course, this legislature raising taxes on the wealthy and some parts of the middle class is a factor. But I think the bigger factor is not so much the taxes, in my view, although the Post editorial board believes it's taxes. Part of it, I believe, it is accelerated by the pandemic. People discovered you can be productive working from home. And so you find in New York, they're finding out, well, I can still do my job from Florida, from North Carolina, from home, and still be productive. And companies are sort of accepting that. And that's, I think that's one of the key drivers. The new post-pandemic world, new post-pandemic work world, I think is a factor. New York City is still sees empty office buildings. Office workers are not returning, and their employers have been reluctant to push them back into the office. At the Post, people are in the offices 2 days a week. 2 days a week. I'm there every day when I make it in, and it's a ghost newsroom on Mondays and on Fridays because almost nobody there. It's like we're still in the pandemic, and I'm certain it's the case in other places that aren't pushing employees back into the city. And those who are working are folks who can't work remotely, whether they're firefighters, police officers, nurses, teachers, service workers, people who work in our restaurants, making our meals, who take care of our elderly in nursing homes. They can't work from home, so they have to be on the subway. They have to go to work. Those are the folks who aren't able to take advantage and then move to another lower tax state in order to have a more comfortable life. Yeah, and we need to look at those sort of things.
Yeah, but I gotta take a quick break. But when I come back, I want to talk to you and pick your brain a little bit more as we're talking about the January 6th hearings going on in Washington, D.C. How effective are they? What are we learning? And where do we go from here? That and more on Perspectives when we return right after this. Welcome back to Perspectives. Daren Jaime here with you, and we're continuing our conversation with Mike Benjamin as we're talking politics and talking on a local level, talking about the governor in the last segment, and we now turn to a little bit more on the national level, on the tri-state level, Michael. We know that Governor Murphy, in a highly unanticipated fashion, received strong opposition down to the final wire. Also on a national level, we take a look at Flores coming away and in her victory. So talk to me a little bit about what this means and what we're seeing right now, because to some, it's a sign that people are fed up. Others, it's a sign that change is necessary and change is needed, and no more of the status quo.
Yeah, I think you're right. You're seeing that in the Jersey race recently, and you're seeing that in the most recent special election down in Texas. A traditionally Democratic congressional district was flipped by Republican Mayra Flores, and it has national Democrats worried that this has happened. And there's been, if you look at the polls, there's been a steady movement of Hispanic voters, African American voters, and Asian voters to Republicans. In New York City last year for city council races, you had a number of Republicans getting elected, and you had a number of Asian Americans have been voting for those Republican candidates. If you look at the breakdown of the vote for Curtis Sliwa for mayor last year, he got strong support from Asian Americans in Queens and Lower Manhattan. It shows you people are sort of fed up with some of the Democratic message. I know for Asians in New York, it was the hate crimes. It's also been the effort to do away with some of the specialized high schools and some of the gifted and talented. Many Asians saw it as being targeted at them, being told that they were disproportionately in those programs, so that they're angry at that. Over and down in Texas, it's the immigration issue. You wouldn't think that a district that's heavily Hispanic, Mexican American would be interested in closing borders to other Latinos coming up illegally. But that's an issue, as well as inflation, which is running rampant across the United States. Gas prices are up. I mean, there are people who it's now costing $90 to $100 to fill up their car or SUV. It got so bad in New York State recently suspended its gas tax to give New Yorkers some sense of relief, although it's like 16 cents a gallon at the pump. But it's something, and they're trying to do that all across the states. President Biden is really being hammered on inflation. It's at a record level. It hasn't been seen since you and I were teenagers. The level of inflation and the things that are happening haven't happened in 40 years. It's not as bad as it was back then. We also had a stagnant economy going along with the inflation. I mean, my dad owned the car in the 70s, and we had to buy a gas cap lock to prevent people from trying to steal gasoline. That's how bad things had gotten back then. During the last inflation and at high gas prices, people were actually siphoning off gas from other people's cars. People began to buy gas locks. We haven't gotten to that level yet. People are actually still paying for their gas, and we haven't seen the hijacking, any kind of crime associated with high gas prices. But the president's being hammered on inflation. Whether you live in Texas or New York, you're seeing higher food prices, meat, burgers, milk. You have the baby formula shortage. Right. Those things are there, and people are upset, and the Republicans have a different message, and there are those who are now willing to listen to that message. The Republicans now have a movement that they're calling Blexit. We have conservative African Americans and moderate Democrats talking about leaving the Democratic Party because it's not serving the interests of African Americans, and that campaign is kicking up. So that's going to be a factor in the midterms as we see them. Maybe not so much in New York, given that it's a really heavily Democratic state. You might still see New York still having an advantage of Democrats in Congress over Republicans, but across the country may not be able to sustain that, and the Republicans have a really good chance of flipping the House and taking back control of the House of Representatives. And it's something that concerns Democrats nationally.
Yeah, I mean, you led into what I was going to ask you, because when we talk about the midterm elections, President Biden right now, some people have criticized him for not getting enough done. And now if the Republicans are able to flip and win in the Congress, that could mean, a huge problem for President Biden in terms of policy and executing policy. Some people say, if you haven't done that much already, can't expect too much more if Republicans flip the House.
Both are actually true. Hard to believe, but both of those statements are actually true. Republicans take over the House, you'll have even more gridlock in Washington, D.C. in trying to get something done. And because of the narrow margins Democrats have in the House and in the U.S. Senate, it's really been hard for the president to move on his agenda without being able to count on 60 votes to get anything done in the Senate. And the senators have been reluctant to do away with the filibuster rule. So that has prevented them from really moving large parts of the president's agenda. If you look at it from the New York Post point of view, we don't want to see much of the president's agenda moved, because things like his efforts to shut down natural gas and oil production as a way of dealing with climate change. We see it as hurting the economy. The war in Ukraine has put pressure on Europe when it comes to getting gas and oil from Russia, the old Soviet Union. And the president's asking American companies to ramp up their production. They're reluctant to do so, knowing what the regulations are and what's coming down the road. They don't see something as being profitable for them. And so you have that issue going on. The president wanted to do more on climate change and dealing with that and becoming more of an alternative energy green economy. And you have the oil companies haven't yet transitioned over yet. And so they don't think there's room for their product. And so they're not really ramping up production to help ease some of the problems that we're having. You have some of the economic stagnation that's beginning to come as a consequence of supply issues across the United States and across the world. You have the high inflation. And so the president is really facing an economy that's beginning to slow down. It's having some level of disarray. You have Wall Street, where investors are now pulling away from tech companies and trying to go into more stable companies, and also moving money from the stock market into the bond market as they see the Fed raising interest rates and believing they have a greater earning potential in the bond market. And that bear market has a ratcheting effect of lowering expectations and then bringing the economy down. So it's really the president is really in a bind as to what he can do to turn things around ahead of the midterm elections, other than focusing on what the issues are concerning the Democrats and how evil Donald Trump is, and that we can't let his acolytes get control of the U.S. government, get control of the Congress. It doesn't bode well for Democrats across the country to have your leader in the White House whose numbers are low, which means voters don't have confidence in you, and it's not motivating your base, whether it's urban Democrats or suburban Democrats, to come out strongly and in numbers as they did 2 years ago to defeat Trump, to then look to roll back any potential Republican gains in the Congress. Democrats have the work cut out for them outside of New York.
Yeah, going to pay close attention as the graphic says. The things are revealing coming out of the January 6th hearings, but the outcome still remains to be seen. Mike Benjamin, I want to thank you for your time here with us on Perspectives. As always, terrific insight that you bring. Of course, we'll be continuing to watch our governor race, and as that continues to go to the primaries, and then as we get towards the bigger election, of course, we got to have you back and talk more about what's happening. Mike Benjamin, thanks for being with us. That about wraps it up for this edition of Perspectives. I am Daren Jaime. We thank you for joining us. As always, here on Perspective, stay tuned. We bring you the news, the issues, the things that matter the most, the conversations, but most importantly, some very special guests. And most of all, continue to share your perspective with somebody else, because you just don't know, it might make a difference in somebody else's life. Take care, and God bless.